English. I think everyone has translation options. Like if you need to get headphones, headsets, we could. Okay. Yes, is sustainability a hype or not? We have this very interesting, actually, title for this session. So we all work in different areas of sustainability. I teach sustainability. I do several projects. And as you know, there is like a wide range of projects, and there is like a very different understandings of sustainability. So some companies, some governments, some local governments take this very seriously, plan ahead, share their findings, share their targets and stuff, but some of them actually visit their PR agencies and ask them to come up with a sustainability story. So we only see these stories in media, but actually it's just a bubble. And we also are often faced with accusations of greenwashing, bluewashing, pinkwashing, purplewashing. So this will be our discussion today. And then, like after I ask my questions, they will be open to your questions. So Laura, welcome. We're so happy to have you here. And Arda, good to see you again. Arda and I were at an award ceremony last night, so from theater to sustainability, but it's all linked in a way. So before we begin, I will ask both my panelists how they define sustainability, because I really want to make sure we're on the same page. As you know, when we said sustainability, many people thought of green for many, many years. Just green, just recycling, and that's how they called them sustainable. But, you know, through the years, our understanding of sustainability changed and hopefully evolved. So I'll begin with Laura. How would you define sustainability?
Thank you so much. It sounds like such a simple question, doesn't it? What is sustainability? But I agree, we need this one definition so we can have these meaningful conversations and actually avoid greenwashing by understanding the terms. And it's interesting you say it's changed over time. I think the definition I find most useful is actually from 1987. So it's slightly before I was even born. So it's not changed so much. But I think it's really important to come back to that definition from the United Nations in 1987, which kind of has two key bits I'd want to pull out. The first is the idea of three pillars of sustainability. So your social, your environmental, and your economic. And this is exactly what you're saying. You have to have kind of this focus across everything, not just on recycling. It's a whole broad picture. And the second is on the idea of balance. So we need to make sure that the resources we're extracting and the resources we're restoring are in balance, so that the generations of today can have, you know, good livelihoods and quality of life without that being to the detriment of future generations. And I think for me that's the most important thing. At CDP we see this in a couple of different ways. One is the relationship between climate and nature. And I think it's hard to even say climate and nature as though they're sort of different things. We know they're not. It's part of a single system. And so really this is thinking about what are our areas of rich biodiversity, our rainforests and our mangroves, and, you know, those peatlands, which are actually also really good carbon sinks. We have to kind of save both in order to save one. You can't reach net zero without biodiversity and vice versa. And the other area that I think is useful to think about from a CDP perspective is the kind of places where we see these pillars coming together, your social, environmental, and economic. And this is in cities. So I have the pleasure of working with hundreds of cities around the world, and we see the real benefit of cities thinking about social in terms of their environmental action. So we published a report last year called People and Planet, and it was really looking at how cities are taking people-centered action. And this is a jargon term, but it basically means talking to people before trying to do something to them in aid of the climate. I think anyone who attended the plenary earlier today will have seen really good examples from Vienna. of how this has been kind of happened in the real world. And yeah, we found it was really interesting. So most cities, 63% are taking this action. We're speaking with citizens, engaging them in their planning. And also they're more likely to see broader benefits. So if you engage your citizens in your climate action, we saw that you were 7 times more likely to see co-benefits like job creation, like better air quality and health impacts, for example. So this is such a good example of cities taking climate action in a way that delivers social and economic benefits. So this is a very big answer to a very small question, which I think demonstrates the diversity of the topic. But yeah, this is where I would begin.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like balance is a key concept, exactly. So the 3 pillars plus balance. So that's what I took notes of from your answer. I'll get back to you because I'm really curious about what you do at CDP. But in the second round, I'll ask you about that. So I'm turning to Arda. Arda has been working on sustainability and different aspects of sustainability, and actually 3 pillars, all of them. So how would you define sustainability in your own words?
Yes, it's a very critical issue to discuss. But I see the audience mostly Turkish speaking, so if I may, I would like to switch to Turkish.
Sure.
Laura, please. Aslında Laura'nın söylediği gibi 3 eksende sadece çevre konusu, sadece iklim konusu.
About the environment or climate or environmental sensitivity, but there is the economic dimension which is of critical importance. So unless you have economic sustainability, nothing will matter, nor the environment, the climate. So we have to acknowledge that there is an important economic dimension of the issue. And we're not talking about a romantic approach, by the way. The climate crisis we're talking about is not only an issue for tree huggers or environmentalists, but it's a big problem for the business world as well, because we also have some concerns about economic sustainability as the business world, right? So when you put people at the center, you have the planet on one side, the economy on the other side. Just like Laura has said, we have this 3 pillars, these 3 pillars to manage the issue. So we need to tackle all these 3 dimensions to be able to manage this process of sustainability. So I do believe that when we think about the ecosystem and ecosystem management, it's not only about the environment, it's not only about the climate crisis, global warming, and natural disasters created by it. So we shouldn't take such a shallow approach. We need to come to a fundamental consensus first. So the second thing Laura talked about was also important.
And that's citizens versus cities, people living in the cities and individuals living in cities, our individual responsibilities and how we discuss these things in detail. Yet another thing about sustainability is the fact that, yes, this is a vast topic, really complex, really complicated. So on an individual level, how do you go about thinking about your personal responsibilities? Because those are really in the back burner. People, most of the time, they say, what can I possibly do as an individual, right? I mean, that's what they think, and they forego their own responsibilities, or they tend to forget about their own responsibilities, but that's not the case. So what Laura said is really critical. We as citizens, as human beings, we need to be cognizant of our responsibilities, and we need to fulfill our responsibilities. We need to assume responsibility. And when it comes to companies or the public authority or civil society organizations, we need to exert pressure on them and hold them accountable. First of all, we need to assume personal responsibility within the system. This is quite important because this is a transformative thing as well. We need to think about that, and also we need to, hold others accountable and do whatever is required to build a more sustainable world. I think this is very important because it's not just about institutions, it's not just about the government. It's not just about civil society or big companies. Of course, all of these have to embark on this journey of transformation, and they have started doing that because there's regulations and public pressure and so on and so forth. But I think the main responsibility lies with individuals, and only when we initiate an individual journey can we trigger other mechanisms. Yes, this was great. Thank you very much. You've talked about the transformative power of the individual, which I wholeheartedly believe in, because individuals pass the torch to others, and then they build action, basically. They shouldn't forego their responsibilities and expect companies or the government to do something. This needs to be reciprocal, and we need to transform one another. So this is something that we should always remember, and we should always be focusing on individuals, and we need to also focus on other living organisms as well. We need to redefine ourselves and our environs as a result.
I'll get confused after a while, like switching languages. Okay, Laura, when I found out you'll be in the panel, I was very happy because you and I work at on a very similar topic at Açık Açık, the Openleaf platform. We ask all the NGOs to disclose their data, but then we connect it to a fundraising mechanism. So we have a very strong carrot there. We tell them, if you don't disclose this data, you won't be included in the system. But at CDP, you're doing amazing work, so we would like to hear about what you do, and then I'm really curious personally as well about how you convince them, companies, cities, regions even, to disclose their data. Do you have a carrot?
Thank you, and I feel I should make clear this is very genuine curiosity, because before the session, Itır was asking me, what do you do? How do you get them to do it? And I said, you have to wait. I'll tell you now. So for anyone not familiar with CDP, and this might be many of you, a few years ago, a journalist described CDP as the most important environmental NGO no one's ever heard of. So this is part of all of our job now, to actually explain what we are and who we do. What we do, sorry. So CDP's been running for about 20 years now, over 20 years, and we were set up as really a mechanism for investors to drive change from the companies they invest in. And so again, this kind of carrot and stick of finance working together. We now run the world's largest environmental disclosure platform, working with 20,000 organizations every year to disclose their environmental data. This is about 18,000 companies and over 1,000 cities, states, and regions worldwide. And so it's a really impressive lift and a heavy lift. This is not an easy tick box questionnaire. This is substantial, good quality, credible data. So it's, I really respect the time that people put into reporting to us. So they report a huge range of different information across climate change, forests, water, mitigation, adaptation, very varied. And in terms of the why, we're really proud of what we've built, but we haven't built it alone. We have this huge network of different organizations we work with who make this request for organizations to disclose to us. So it's not just me banging on your door saying, hello, please, Istanbul, disclose, maybe answer my questionnaire. It's a network of 800 investors making this ask, a network of 200 of the biggest purchasing organizations, including companies you'll have heard of, like L'Oreal, Unilever, Walmart, and also folks like the United States General Service Administration. So this is the people who buy all the stuff for the US government. So really substantial actors making that ask. And then on the cities and states and regions side, the people making that ask are lots of those who are in this room and in this conference is global and regional NGOs providing support. And a lot of my colleagues will have heard me say that my one aim in life is for people to stop sending Google surveys to cities, asking them for information we already have and we already publish publicly, free for anyone to use for non-commercial use. So we know cities have very limited time and we want them to use it well, which is why we collect all this information in one place and then distribute it to our partners and the wider network and communities for them to use. So this is one piece, is I think if your biggest investor, your biggest customer, your national government and the people giving you support were asking you to respond to something, you probably would. So I think this is one. Another one is this desire to improve. So something that we do as part of the process of working with CDP, We provide all of our disclosing organizations with a score from A to D. It's like being in high school again. A is good, D is not so good. But D is the beginning of your journey. It shows disclosure, whereas A, thank you. A is leadership. So what we like to see is organizations progressing from D to A over time, and we do see this happen. We see them improve based on the feedback and the support they can access having taken that first step to disclose. So we know that if a company's disclosed for 2 years or more, they're substantially more likely to have a credible net zero target, for example. With cities, we see that over time, they develop their climate action plans, their adaptation goals, they assess vulnerability. We see them taking these steps in real time, so it's really exciting. And the final piece I wanted to mention is finance. It's definitely a big carrot, and this is not a promise that if you come and take my business card at the end, you'll be given a big check to do all your climate action. I'm sorry, this won't happen. But what we are seeing more and more is interest from the financial community in CDP data. Like I mentioned, this is how we began, working with investors on our corporate data. But now more and more on the city, states, and region side, we're seeing CDP disclosure as a route to accessing technical assistance, project preparation support, and actual funding of projects. And this is really important. We know that cities get about 7% of the investment they need to actually deliver their climate action, which is terrifying because we know cities are on the front line and they need to act. So any routes to kind of increase the route for investment in cities are really important. We see this actually happening. I think I'm very excited by practical examples. So last month, one of these funds that we work with asked for a direct connection to 20 cities because they'd seen their data in our reports and they wanted to fund those specific projects on adaptation and climate action. So this is really exciting. And earlier this year, we had an official endorsement from the European Investment Bank who endorsed city, states, and regions disclosure for the first time. So this is really exciting. It's early days, but I think this finance work will become more and more important. So I think 3 things: our powerful network of partners, our support and growth over time and performance, and then thirdly, just a bit of money always helps.
I'm like, when you mentioned the investors, like it also sounded like a path, right? It's a long road. How did they eventually come to see this as a, significant factor, or how did they come to see that this is what they should actually invest in? Yeah, I have so many questions, sorry, because I'm really curious as to how we change the minds of the people, because it requires a systematic change, right, and how that happens.
Absolutely. So the CDP actually began as the idea of asking investors to ask the companies they're investing in to take climate action. There was nothing about disclosure at the very beginning. And so our founders, two men called Paul, so Paul Dickinson was speaking with these investors and saying, you need to demand climate action. And they said, we don't have the data. We can't do that because we don't know what they're doing and we don't know if it's important. And so that's why Paul went and said, okay, I'll write you a questionnaire. And the CDP questionnaire, for anyone who's seen it, is now very lengthy, very technical. Back then, it was one side of A4, printed out, a manual piece. And that was what the investors asked for, is they needed that information, this transparency, accountability, in order to actually determine if climate change was important to them. And now, 23 years later, we see, it concretely is. Some of those investors are building indexes based on CDP's data, and they're, giving preferential loan rates to, for example, to our A-list companies. So.
Excellent. So I have so much to learn from you. Thank you so much. This is like, it also gives us hope. Thank you. So I'll come back to you with other questions. So now I turn to Arda again. Then I should ask my question in Turkish maybe. So, okay. Evet, Arda, şimdi Yapı Kredi tabii bu alanda çok uzun yıllardır çok güzel projeler yapıyor. Ama önce şunu duymak istiyorum senden. Projelere gelmeden...
We get to the projects. When it comes to sustainability as a philosophy, what do you envisage? What is your vision vis-a-vis sustainability? And what are the projects that you have devised and continue to put into action? Now, actually, again, picking up from where Laura left off, institutions such as CDP are very important for companies like ours. They're a source of reference because we, when it comes to the transformation of companies, We look at global institutions that measure their performance, that report their performance in a transparent manner. For investors and for the public opinion, what institutions such as CDP are doing is really important. Now, on the company side, there's this incredible transformation story, and many things are changing. On the one hand, you have institutions such as CDP, global commitments, scoring companies such as S&P and Fitch, and these, when it comes to sustainability, these all have criteria, right? These rate companies based on their sustainability, and they do this quite extensively, and we do a lot of reporting as well, and that is why we try to also gauge whether this performance translates into action, and that can only be ascertained through independent bodies such as CDP. So it's a checks and balances system. So for that transformation process, this is of critical importance. And when it comes to the finance industry, as Laura talked about investors, yes, the finance industry has this transformative power, and as Itır said, it's both a stick and a carrot, because the finance industry, within the framework of sustainability, we know that it has this transformative power when it comes to financing costs and when it comes to financing prowess, not just our own debts, but our credit relations with our customers. Sustainability is an important indicator. So on a global scale, here's what we think. Now, if as a bank, if we look at emissions, unless you do something about emissions of the companies that you invest in, then that footprint falls within your responsibility, right? And we have this Science-Based Targets Initiative, Zero Banking Alliance. We have some commitments to these international bodies. In the run-up to 2050, we aspire to be carbon neutral. We are a financial institution. We're not a factory. We do not do manufacturing. We do not have a footprint because of manufacturing. But on the other hand, we invest or we finance companies, hundreds of large-scale companies. We extend loans to them. These companies operate in different industries, and some of these industries are quite high in terms of emissions. So our mission here should be to also help these customers transform themselves, and we should try and offer them transformation that they need, financing that they might need on this road. Let's say you have a customer, a corporate customer that produces cement, their emission and data. Now we have data sets that we didn't necessarily ask for in the past. So I mean that's a very important criterion for decision making for us. And here's what we say. Now these are the advanced technologies with renewable energy. You can reduce your electricity consumption. You can do that, or you can use these new technologies to use a different sort of chimney and cut back your emissions. So do this transformation, reduce your environmental impact, and then in return we're going to extend a loan to you. That's what we say. And these loans that we extend, I mean, that's the carrot side. We offer it more favorable conditions. So all of these sorts of trigger one another. So you reduce your carbon footprint, and I, in return, will finance this. So the emissions that you reduce will also take away from my responsibility, right? I mean, on the financing side, that's what the system is like. And as Yapı Kredi Bank, we are committed to this. There are international commitments that we have made to SPTI, for instance, a very harsh commitment. About temperature increase, we made a very strong commitment, and we have other policies that we need to review, and we also look at many different many different areas. So today, as Yapı Kredi, actually, we are also seeing this as a responsibility, the emissions created by industries that we fund. We, try to help them to become carbon neutral in the upcoming period. So, I mean, we are going through a significant process of change, and companies that generate a lot of emissions today, or industries, in the years to come, if they do not take any precautions, then banks are going to shut them out. They're not going to offer financing to them. We know this very well. They know it too. So on this journey, they also find it an imperative to transform themselves. So yes, they receive financing from banks at the moment, but they're also trying to, continue to work with us. They want to reduce their carbon footprint. And of course, on the one side, you have organizations such as CDP. They play a very important role because they do this in a transparent fashion. They're globally recognized. They provide this data. They provide oversight, and we share these with our investors, our own investors as well. And when we also look out for funds, we get asked these questions as well. People say, "What are you doing about these things? What's the plan? What is it that you implement? What is your roadmap?" We get asked these questions as well. That is why we need to also help ourselves, help our own transformation, and help others, help our stakeholders, so that they can embark on this journey and complete this journey with success. And also, behind the scenes, we look at data from CDP, S&P, and Fitch to get this done, and it's quite serious work, I should say. Yes, transforming with stakeholders, that is really important, right? This is something that we need to do in tandem, because only then can we make progress. There needs to be a push and pull, sometimes a carrot, sometimes a stick, right? I mean, do this or sort of thing. We need to transform them, and they will transform us in return. That's the only way to go about doing this. Thank you for this detail.
Now we move on to the, a bit scary bit, because like many companies, when they want to do projects or when they want to, partner up with an NGO and also be, candidate for a sustainability award sometimes, or give an interview, they could be accused of greenwashing, bluewashing, and pinkwashing now, like we're also seeing that. So sometimes I observe them being very nervous, like, should I do this? How much of this should I actually publicly talk about? And people like us tell them, you should, because you should set a good example. Like we tell Arda, tell us the story. So you set the standard, you tell a good story. But they're almost nervous to ever speak about the work they do because of these potential accusations. So you work with so many companies, governments, regions even. How can they avoid these accusations? Big question again, but I'm really curious to hear your answer.
We like the big questions. It's a big topic, so we need big questions. Well, I think the audience may sadly be predicting my answer, which is obviously come and speak with me, report to CDP. This is how to avoid greenwashing. No, I say this in jest, but I think really there are two key words here. One is transparency, and the other is integrity. And I think this word integrity gets used a lot, and it's hard to define. And I think to understand it, it's worth looking at the context of where we are and how we got here. So I think over the last sort of 10, 15 years, we've seen this proliferation, right, of net zero targets, of climate neutral language, of I am green, I am sustainable, and this is brilliant. And I think it's really important to say this is brilliant, and we can get into the weeds of what that should be, but it's amazing to think that we have thousands of organizations around the world saying, I care about the environment, my shareholders care, my customers care, enough for me to put this in my strategy. So I think, we have to acknowledge this is really, really a success. And you wouldn't have expected that in 1987 with that UN definition of sustainability, right? That was not the expectation. So I think that's where we've been coming from, is this proliferation. And the problem comes is that it's very, very easy to say, I will be net zero. I could say, I'll be net zero by next Tuesday. And then I'll leave the room, you'll never see me again, and you'll wonder, oh, I wonder if she did it. On Wednesday, you'll be thinking, is she net zero? And that would be so easy for me to do. And I think sometimes when companies are in this situation of greenwashing, it's not malicious. It's because it's so easy to say, I will do this, and to mean it. And then you peel back the cover, you realize how hard it is, and you kind of run away again. So we end up in this situation with lots of organizations making these announcements, but then them not really leading to action, and it being a little bit, they get stuck along the way. So this is where a lot of organizations found themselves, and Arda mentioned SBTI, the Science-Based Targets Initiatives, earlier. And I think this is one of the earliest examples of that kind of really stringent, and you mentioned, it's a really hard thing you have to do with SBTI, but importantly so. And that was one of the earliest examples, I think, of having very, very stringent rules around, I say I have a target, what does it mean? Is it in line with science? And that being validated and assessed by actual scientists. I sit next to some of them in the office. They're real technical people. And so I think that was one of the first examples. And then this started to spread and get broader. And I think you could look at the United Nations Race to Zero campaign as a good example of this. Nigel Topping, the high-level champion who launched it, said this is a broad tent with a high door, a high floor. So everyone's welcome, but you have to step up to be let in. And this was a real moment where initiatives like SBTI and other initiatives around the world started to be assessed, saying, you say your members are net zero, what does it mean? And Arda mentioned the Net Zero Banking Alliance as well, and Net Zero Asset Owners Alliance, and these were all part of that campaign as well. So it was really putting in these rules of what do those requirements mean, and unsurprisingly, it was pledge. So make your commitment, send out your tweet, send out your press release. It said plan as well, so have an actual thorough plan of how you will get there and integrate it into your strategy. There's one I always forget. I think it's proceed. You have to actually take the action. And that's quite an important one. I shouldn't forget this. And the final one was publish. So this was actually transparently reporting how you're getting on every year. And then they've recently added one on persuade. So you should be influencing those around you as well. And this is what you were speaking to earlier of actually everyone needs to take this action. So we have these Race to Zero requirements. And then last year, after months of work, the UN Secretary General's high-level expert group on net zero published a report called Integrity Matters. And I think this is where this word integrity becomes really important, because it stops being an amorphous, undefined term and is actually a list of recommendations. What does your net zero target need to be to have integrity? And I think that's really, really important. It moves us away from those announcements without any substance to them. A real important part of that is reporting, and that's where we kind of come in. But I want to make clear that this is not an additional piece of homework. Companies have a lot to be getting on with, and this is not something on top of it, as well as your best practice reporting. And I'd say at this stage as well, like our A-list companies, they're not doing everything right. We know this. We know that they are not always performing perfectly all of the time. But what they do have is best-in-class governance on their environmental actions. So we know that they are really including environment in their wider strategies, their wider business plans, their financial planning, their risk planning. Some of them, their CEOs only get a bonus if their environmental performance is on track. And so I think that's something to think about and start thinking, who are you working for? And is their pocket money reliant on how the world is doing more broadly? So yeah, this, like I say, Integrity Matters is not an additional piece. We work really hard. I say we, I mean the much more clever and technical people who I sit with in the office work really hard every year to update our questionnaire to make sure it's in line with the latest best practice standards. So if you're reporting to CDP, you are at the same time reporting in line with Integrity Matters recommendations, in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, in line with requirements under SBTI, and under the Task Force of Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, which is one of the longest titles ever. But just, it's all in one place. So again, just not having multiple ways of finding out this data, companies or cities and states just have to take one action to have that integrity and that transparency all in one place. And I think that's what we need to do, is actually make it easier for organizations to have integrity in their commitments rather than making it harder without cause.
Oh, yes, thank you so much. Transparency, accountability, and integrity definitely are the key terms here. So I will ask Arda if they ever get accusations, such accusations, and how they deal with them. Evet Arda, sana dönüyorum burada çünkü hepimiz her ne yaparsak yapalım, hani hem kurumlar hatta bireyler olarak benim de arada başım.
Or as individuals, even I face that from time to time. In the projects on sustainability that we carry out in our discussions, we might be criticized of greenwashing. And we ask each other in such times, what shall I do? Or what would you do in my place? Have you ever faced such accusations of greenwashing? If yes, from the lens of a communicator, how do you react and how should we react to such criticism? Well, we need to draw the line between certain things. We're talking about sustainability, and this should be a business model for the companies. So all the business processes should be transformed in line with sustainability. If they're not doing this, if they're pretending to do this, then it means they are considering this only as a brand strategy or a competitive leverage. And then it's all about greenwashing that we talk about, right? For instance, a company says we are using 70% recycled material in our packaging in any industry, food, beverages, detergent. If a company on one hand is saying this, and if in the background they're not changing their production processes, nothing, the fact that they have recycled packaging doesn't mean that they are a sustainable company. For instance, Tesla, they are manufacturing electrical cars, right, in the world. Compared to fossil fuel powered vehicles, it's very good, right? But Tesla really was left out of the S&P sustainability index because they said if you are not treating your employees in the right manner, the fact that you're sustainable elsewhere doesn't mean anything. Just like Laura has said, it's not only about reporting on emissions on the climate and environment dimension, but in your reporting, you have to show, do you have policies on the rights of the employees? Is it approved by the board? Do these people have independent boards of ethics to apply to, for instance? For example, in Turkey, these are the things that we're not very familiar with and used to. And that's why the management also has challenges. There is a measurement based on the gap between the salaries of CEOs and employees. And now we are reporting on these to see how fair we are treating the employees. Yes, we have the people and economy, but for sustainability, now we need to focus more and more on people because we're reporting now. And for SPTI, when we gave our targets, after that, for one whole year, we worked to calculate our emissions. And it was a very harsh process. We told SPTI our targets, and now they started a validation process, just like Laura has said. You can say, I will be carbon neutral by 2050. That's not enough. You have to prove how you will do it. The global system asks you to prove it now. And for those companies that do not do this, it wouldn't be wrong to say that they're not doing anything at all. Another topic is that when you govern this process within the framework of sustainability, you shouldn't forget that this is a multidimensional, multi-layered issue. So you shouldn't focus on one thing only, but you need to keep your hands on all dimensions. And there's always a difference between what you see in the forefront and what's happening in the background, in the backstage. we need to have an awareness of this so that we will be avoiding the greenwashing part. And as consumers, I do believe that we have a serious responsibility, both in terms of changing our own consumption habits and in terms of making a pressure on the companies to change theirs. So we are criticized sometimes because of the sectors that we are financing. Yes, we do not finance coal investments. However, in Turkey, we have ongoing energy-related, transportation-related, construction-related projects. The global sustainability understanding says that you are liable to transform those sectors. So if fossil fuels are used mainly by certain companies, even those companies have a responsibility or a liability to go green. You can't say as the finance sector that you will not work with those companies anymore. No, you'll have to discuss with them, tell them that they need to go through a transformation process. If they're not willing to do that, then they will not be able to work with those companies. So the important thing is to force these companies to go through that transformation with the carrot and the stick. Carrot being the financing, stick being not giving the financing. So we have, of course, another dimension which is important, the economic dimension. We are going through an energy bottleneck all around the world. Energy is now a commodity, as we know. So you can't just leave these sectors out of the equation. It's impossible. What the EU is going through in the last 2-3 years after the Russian-Ukrainian crisis is obviously there. And we also have the nuclear energy story. We need to discuss this. Is nuclear clean or not? Does it have any risks for the environment, for the people? We need to, of course, lay down all these things, but it's a developing issue, just like the change in CDP. All global rating companies or reporting countries have frameworks that change dynamically. On one hand, we are learning, and we need to find a solution for the best direction as the entire system. Otherwise, one party will move very fast, another one will be left behind, and it won't be rational in this wide context. Okay, thank you so much. Yes, the fossil fuel issue, I think this is very important for all of us. Even when you organize an event, if you are somehow associated with these people, you might be accused of greenwashing. But I agree with you, if we don't transform together, then we don't have an alternative energy resource that will be 100% enough. If we don't transform, we will have energy crisis, just like the one we had in Europe. So if we don't set forth on this journey together and transform together, if we leave them out, then this will further damage transformation. So on a personal note, and in terms of the organizations that I'm working with, I really agree with you. So my last question will be about the topic of this session, hype or not?
This will be the last question. The title of this session was, is sustainability a hype? Which I loved. So I will ask the question to you.
Laura.
Or is it sustainable? Is
Yok.
sustainability a sustainable concept? To put it in other words.
This is becoming like metaverse now, isn't it?
Yeah,
How
exactly.
sustainable is sustainable?
Meta questions here.
So I think when we come back to where we started today and thinking about what do we actually mean by sustainability, and I think, Arda, you put it so beautifully there, you need to transform business systems. And I think when we think of it like that, yeah, it is sustainable and that it's growth and it's progression over time. And I think what we really need to do is work hard to make sure that's what sustainability means, that we have this accountability, this transparency, integrity we've been speaking about today through that system transformation that Arda was speaking about. When sustainability becomes a buzzword, yeah, that's hype, right? That's what we need to avoid. But I think I have real hope for the future that with all of the kind of changes and, you know, even having organizations like this on stage together speaking, I think is so hopeful for the future that we're all pushing in this same direction. And you'll see this across the conference this week at MARUF, understanding, you know, all of these actors pulling in the same direction towards this kind of shared future. And that's why I have hope, you know, hopefully sustainability is not a hype. Ask me again
in a few years. Yeah. On Wednesday I'll ask again. Next Wednesday when you're net zero. Okay, I will ask the same question to you. Arda, sana soruyorum aynı soruyu. Evet, balon mu değil mi? Ve balon olmadığını...
Question to you as well. And how can we be convinced that it's not hype? So is sustainability a sustainable concept? Well, let's not call it a hype, but is it fashionable or is it a buzzword, let's say? I think it's a buzzword, yes. But I think it's, again, the marketing and communications people who do this, because every time we are trying to find new concepts to make our brand, our product differentiate among others. So this is also leading to greenwashing. The brands try to show themselves as very sensible, sensitive, a very caring brand. But then sometimes they don't do anything and then it's just greenwashing. So the masses, the people, we need to really convince for real transformation to take place. When we see the real story behind what the brands are claiming to say, then we miss certain things, right? So the responsibility here is important. We call it greenwashing for the organizations, right? But this greenwashing causes the risk that people will not understand the real importance of this issue. And then, instead of really achieving the transformation, we will just have band-aid solutions for problems that require surgery, for instance. Yes, it might be a hype. There should be some wind blowing, but we need to take steps together to really transform our businesses together. This thing should be on the agendas now for regulation. We need to have more transparency, better regulation. And in Turkey, for instance, creation of validated data sets is very important, or we need to come up with a carbon market. When we do all these things, we will be successful. If we cannot turn this hype into real action, then we will miss it. But is it really a hype? Yes, it is a hype, definitely also, because we need to come to terms in terms of the understanding we have about the different definitions. People sometimes tend to think, oh, this is a topic for the environmentalists. 1 Celsius degree doesn't matter. 2 degrees doesn't matter. This lack of awareness really prevents us from seeing the real scale of the problem. So sometimes this is a hype, but I think we should benefit from this hype. As we have the hype already, as the wind is blowing already, let's use it for the better. And with some public pressure, we can force the governments to take action. We can have always pressure on companies for more transparent reporting. Even one single T-shirt you buy, you need to question how it was manufactured, who was involved in the cultivation of the cotton, for instance. If you start tracing this, then things will change. Again, as I said in the beginning, it's all about our responsibility. Okay, thank you. The individuals need to be aware of these things and hold people accountable, right? Because we can tell the companies to be accountable, but we need to have people to hold them accountable, right? If no one asks this to be done, then they won't do it on a voluntary basis. And for fundraising and investment sectors, we need to be the party that holds the companies accountable when we buy a product. Just like you said, we should ask people how this product was manufactured. I also have a short example on this. We were working with an institution to reduce inequalities, and I asked them a question about the inequalities in their own organization. And what they told me was 1 times 150. So the difference is 1 to 150. And they were talking about a project that they carried out in Africa to reduce inequalities. And then they told me, no one wants to go there. No one wants to go there, they told me, so let's close the subject. They said, but this shouldn't be the attitude, right? Just like Laura said very well, integrity is important. Is it really a part of my DNA now? In all my processes, in all my relations with my parties in the supply chain, am I really implementing these practices? This is the question we need to ask. Thank you. I would like to thank both speakers. We still have some time, so if you have any questions.
Soruyu nasıl soruyoruz onu bilmiyorum ben.
So how should we do this? Should we pass on the mic to you for translation? Okay, you're going to ask your question in English, but there might be those who need a Turkish translation. But so please use the mic so that our interpreters can hear you.
So my question is basically what just drew my attention when you said that there is like a list of recommendations for companies, and the word of recommendations. So why don't we have strict legal regulations that can enforce companies to comply with these certain strategies and etc. Because there is a very big lack in concepts and constitution. For example, in Turkey, all the 3 pillars of sustainability are somehow touched in the Constitution of 1982, but still the concept of sustainability, for example, is not still explained in a good manner. The same is true for other countries as well. So how do we cope with this? And is it possible to achieve sustainable development goals without the existence of these specific legal regulations? Thank you.
Thank you so much. What a brilliant question to kick off with. So no pressure to everybody else to follow this. So yeah, thank you for your question. What I'd say is I think we're moving in that direction, particularly when we're thinking about transparency. More and more national governments, even the EU recently announcing regulated disclosure, so companies above a certain size needing to disclose their environmental data. We've just seen the same from California, which is, I think, the 3rd biggest economy in the world or something crazy for one state. They've just released the same requirement last week as well at New York Climate Week, that it will be compulsory for companies above a certain size to disclose their environmental data. So I think we're getting there, but I'd say that's only one side, right? That's regulation on reporting, not necessarily on action. And I think we do need this, this lever of national government regulation and the legal apparatus to be used more and more. It's, a mixed bag of if we're seeing this, and I say this with the cloud of shame above my head coming from the UK this week, where we've just rolled back on a lot of our regulations that were going to deliver net zero. So I don't feel I have the right to answer this question coming from the UK this week, because I'm too embarrassed by what my national government's doing.
Ben ekleme yapabilirim aslında.
Tabii lütfen.
Aslında işte
Actually, as Laura indicated, the UK is a great example because for 2030, for diesel vehicles, I mean, that was the cutoff date, right? But then Prime Minister Sunak took a step back and made that 35 instead of 30. And I have been reading The Guardian, and it has caused quite a furore, right? I mean, countries are hypocritical, and we can talk about that. And yes, we have all these problems, and then there are needs stipulated by sustainability, and there's a gap between the two. At the World Economic Forum, it was announced that the next 2 years will be quite difficult in terms of living costs, And we have that problem. We have energy bottlenecks all across the globe, and we have the war between Russia and Ukraine, and we have grain-related issues, grain difficulties or shortages. So how do you think about neutrality in 2050? We don't have the time, we don't have the will, we don't have the luxury to talk about these things, but that's not how it should be. We need to be aware that the steps that we do not take today will come back to us, come back and hit us in the future, like a boomerang. They will cause really serious implications. But governments obviously are short-sighted, and especially when it comes to the economy, they want to. They're not really willing to regulate. Yes, there are frameworks, there's taxonomy, all these reports and papers. We do all these preparations behind the scenes, but when do we hit the button? That is the question. That is always delayed, right? If I'm not mistaken, the European Union, about the Green Deal, because of the Green Deal, the calendar that was published has also been delayed, right? Carbon tax has been delayed as well. So what I'm trying to say is our current agenda does not allow us to take concrete steps, but companies, third parties, reports, all of this is important to lay the groundwork, and there's a lot happening, right? For instance, for banking, the regulatory authority is also preparing a framework in Turkey, and as of today we are expected to fulfill certain criteria, and for that to happen we need to redesign our processes. We shouldn't just sit and wait. There are such companies that do that, and I think they're going to find it incredibly difficult in the future. So it's a challenging topic, but there's a lot of hypocrisy, and I think this is one of the biggest problems in the world. And if the UK cannot do it, Laura, who can, and what can we do?
Belki bir soru daha alıp sonra kapatacağız. Galiba sizin sorunun üzerine kimse soru soramadı. Çıta yukarı çıktı o yüzden. O zaman çok teşekkür ediyoruz Laura, Arda, çok teşekkürler. Çok keyifli bir oturum oldu. Yani bu bir balon değil diyebiliriz sanırım. Umarız değildir. Moda olmasın, yani hani kalıcı olsun ve bunu konuşmaya, birlikte öğrenmeye, birbirimizden öğrenip
learn from one another and transform one another. That remains our hope. Thank you very much. The session is adjourned. Goodbye.